So everyone who was in the military at the time has a September 11th story. Now, everyone has a September 11th story, but military people especially have very interesting stories because it was a really crazy day for everyone in the United States Armed Forces, regardless of what your job was and what you did. Because it was a very chaotic day for everyone in the world, actually. But it was particularly chaotic for the military because there just wasn't a lot of information about what was going on. So this is my story about September 11th and the chaos that resulted on the flight line that day. Now, I was stationed in Ellis Air Force Base at the time. I'd been there maybe 4 months, so I'd been there since May or June, and I was on day shift at the time. And for those who don't know from my previous videos, I was a weapons loader on the F-16 at the time for the weapons school. I was in the 57th AGS Falcon, which was the F-16 weapons school squadron. The aggressors were Viper. We were Falcon. So that day, actually, I had to report to a first aid class for some training. So because I was doing this training class, I didn't have to be at work until a little bit later. Normally, I had to be at work at 8 a.m. However, this class was at 9 a.m., so I could go in a little bit later. So I was on my way to work, and every morning, driving into where I lived off base at the time, every morning on the way to work, I'd listen to Howard Stern in the morning. And I'm listening to Howard Stern like normal, and suddenly he comes over the air and breaks and says that a plane had just crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. And they were talking about how crazy that was. And I remember thinking, wow, holy shit, that's pretty crazy, right? And at this time, of course, like everyone knows, there was no indication that it was a terrorist attack or that the plane had been hijacked. So by the time I got to work, however, there was the rumor had started that the plane was hijacked and it was not an accident. The plane had been purposefully crashed into the World Trade Center. And I get in the classroom and we are watching the footage, the footage from the news that day, watching the North Tower on fire. And we just happened to see, we were watching right as they showed the second plane flying into the South Tower a little after 9 a.m. At this point, no one knows what's going on. And we didn't know what was going to happen when we got to work. And I remember being upset because, this was captivating. At this point, everyone in the world had their televisions on looking at the news, and we were as well. And I remember the instructor saying, well, hey, this is important, but we really got to do this first aid class. And I remember thinking, I don't give a fuck about this first aid class. I want to see what's going on here. This is crazy. So we hurry on. We get through the first aid class, which, nobody's mind was on, doing CPR or whatever we had to do for the dummies. And so we hurry and rush through the first aid class. And I get back to my squadron. When I got to the squadron, it's just chaos. It's just, nobody knew what was going to happen or even what to do. Normally, around that time, close to 10 o'clock, jets were getting prepped for the sorties that day and everyone's on the flight line, getting ready to launch out the aircraft. But that wasn't happening. Everyone was just kind of sitting around inside the squadron building, kind of contemplating what might happen next. All the flights were together. All the weapons guys were together. All the avionics guys were together. So finally, the squadron commander came in and he said he was going to give a impromptu briefing. This was about 10 o'clock, maybe around 10 o'clock. And he stated that terrorists had hijacked 2 planes and flown them into the World Trade Center. And then he said something that I'll never forget. He said that he had been told that the Pentagon had been bombed. Not that a plane flew into it, but that it had been bombed. I won't get into what I think about that. I'll just say that we never got a post brief about the Pentagon. Like, oh, hey, by the way, guys, it wasn't bombed. A plane flew into it. And I'm not a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. I really believe a plane flew into the Pentagon. I just think it was interesting that the squadron commander briefed us that the Pentagon had been bombed. Now, granted, this was only like, 20 minutes after it happened. But that just goes to show what kind of intelligence was being passed around through the Department of Defense during that time. He had also told us that the FAA had grounded all civilian and military flights until they knew what the hell was going on. And that, we were just kind of just waiting to see what would happen next. And that was it. And he turned around and left. Okay, so now it's like, holy crap, terrorists have attacked the World Trade Center. People are, do we need to call home? Or, what's going on? What do I do? We were in Las Vegas. So people immediately started thinking, oh my God, what if they decide to fly planes into the Luxor or whatever? It was a lot of concern, obviously, from people. Most people were just, concerned about their families. It was just chaotic. Nobody knew what was going on. And then suddenly, like a switch, all of the flight chiefs come back in. Our flight chief gives us a very quick briefing. He's like, all right, everyone get out to the flight line, grab your toolboxes, and you guys need to start prepping jets for live loads. And we've been ordered to fly combat air patrols over Las Vegas in order to escort, those words that he used, to escort civilian aircraft. He didn't say anything about shooting them down, but we had to load live munitions. Now, being in the weapons school at Nellis, you actually deal with live munitions a lot. That's the job of the weapons school. The pilots from all over the Air Force, it's almost like the Air Force's version of Top Gun. They come and they get live weapons training. But normally that's only done in a certain phase of training. So to be able to load live munitions outside of that phase of training was honestly surprising. They came out and they said, okay, we're going to load all the jets up with air-to-air frag, 4 AIM-120s, 2 AIM-9s, 510 rounds of high explosive ammo. Get to it. And that was it. And then we just hit the flight line running. Now, normally, when you go out to load a plane, the plane is powered off, it's grounded, you're going to do a preload inspection, you're going to pre-inspect the munitions, you're going to kind of just take your time with the load, make sure you lock in everything correctly. I mean, 2 AIM-120s or 4 AIM-120s and 2 AIM-9s, maybe 30-minute load, maybe. A really good crew could do it probably in less time than that. Even a bad crew, I mean, that's 40 minutes at the most. You're doing it. There's no pilots around. There's no crew chief. And in fact, whenever you load weapons, pilots and crew chiefs are not allowed to be in the area because they are not qualified to load weapons. So they cannot be in the area when weapons are being loaded. So, but that wasn't the case today. When we got out to the flight line, jets were already started. They were like powered up, like engines running on most of the lines out there. Crew chiefs already had their pilots in the cockpits and we're talking to them. And we're out there and they're just like, all right, get to loading. And we just start throwing missiles on airplanes while they're running, which, by the way, is a big no-no. That is not something you are supposed to do. You're not supposed to load weapons while power's on the aircraft because of something called stray voltage. The F-16 is a very, very electrically sensitive aircraft. Stray voltage can go to one of the stations and you will have a very bad experience if stray voltage goes to a missile or a bomb rack or something like that. So rule number one, power's got to be off the jet when you load it. Even during integrated combat turns, there's typically no power on the jet at that time. But today was the exception. Jets had to be in the air as soon as possible. So we're out there. Powers on the jets. Now, the jets stay loaded with gun ammunition. Almost always. You'll never see an operational F-16 without at least target practice ammo in the system, mainly because it's such a pain to, and it's so time consuming to unload and load ammunition in the gun. And in this case, target practice ammo was good enough probably for what they were going to do. They weren't like flying camps against actual military aircraft. So the only things we had to do was we had to what they call hot the guns. You had to pull the electrical safe pin, and then typically there's a mechanical safe inside of the gun system that once that mechanical safe is removed, then rounds can go out of the clearing sector into the firing sector of the gun system. So we had to go around to all the jets while they're running and pop that panel open and take that mechanical safe out, which is really tough to do when the aircraft is running, because normally you get there by climbing up the crew ladder on the side of the cockpit and then like kind of hopping over to climb on top of the jet, and then you pop that panel open. That's not very easy to do when there's no crew ladder and when the engine's running, because you don't want to get close to the intake because you get sucked in. So, you had to do like a chin up on the wing of the aircraft and climb up there and then run across. And that was my job. I was a little guy. I only weighed like 130 pounds, but that was my job. Kurt, we need you to run and hot all these jets up. Just climb up on the wing and climb to the back of the aircraft and take the clearing sector safes off all the gun systems. So I'm running from jet to jet doing that. Low cruiser out there putting AIM-120s and AIM-9s on planes. I even hopped off and loaded an AIM-9 on an F-16 while it was taxiing. True story. Airplane's moving. We're moving with it. We're trying to slide this AIM-9 onto a LA-129 missile launcher rail and get it connected. Now, AIM-9 is not a hard load at all, but the front of the missile, you have to be very careful because it's very delicate. And the person in the front of the missile has to, they've got to feed the missile umbilical through the front of the launcher and tighten it and connect it while the missile's loaded. So having to do that while the aircraft's moving, it was just, that's just insane, But these aircraft they're taxiing out. The low crews are still loading missiles on them. So finally, I think we had 12 jets in the squadron. I think we got 8 of them in the air, or we got 8 of them loaded that morning. They're all lined up on the taxiway, ready to take off. F-15 squadron. Every squad, even the A-10 guys. Like, what are you guys gonna do? You're gonna shoot down civilian aircraft in A-10? But hey, everyone was ready to go because we had no idea what was going on, and the military had determined, okay, we need planes in the air because we don't know how many planes have been hijacked, and if we've got to bring down a civilian aircraft before it crashes into another population center, then we'll do that. But and there's always a but. Something of this magnitude is the perfect opportunity for the brass in the military to try and one-up each other, sadly. And that's what happened the morning of September 11th on Nellis Air Force Base. So Nellis is very, very close to the city of Las Vegas. Of all the bases I've been stationed at, it is probably the closest to actual main population center of a city. You could look out, you could see the strip from the flight line. There was residential areas literally across the street from Nellis Air Force Base. You just walk out the main gate and, you're right in civilian housing. It's very, very close. So as a result, there were a few rules when it came to the flight line operations at Nellis. One was that live munitions were only loaded at a certain section of the flight line called the live ordnance, the live ordnance loading area, which we call Lola. The jets at Lola, when they were parked there, were pointed away from Las Vegas, and that was the only place where live weapons were to be loaded. And as I stated before, the pilot's weapons training phase of their training, that's typically where the jets would go, and we'd load the live ordnance there. We'd spend 2 or 3 months there, and the pilots would fly sorties with live munitions out of their area. Also, another rule was that jets never took off, and those of you who fly DCS may notice this, but jets typically don't take off towards Las Vegas. Typically, they take off the other way. One, the range is that way. They want to minimize the amount of time that jets are pointed towards downtown Las Vegas. So, because of this, there were rumors that it was the base commander, rumors that it was the wing commander. It probably wasn't the base commander. I think it was possibly the fighter wing commander. I don't know who. All I know is that somebody came down and said, hey, you cannot have all of these jets on a taxiway with live munitions pointed towards downtown Las Vegas. You cannot do it. The rules state that live weapons can only be loaded at Lola. So, of course, this caused a series of arguments. And it was funny because ask anyone that was on the Nellis flight line that morning, you could see there was like a heated conversation, a discussion, I guess, between a lot of people with shiny emblems on their uniforms about whether or not it was okay to have fighter jets with live munitions, on them that weren't at Lola. And I would think that of all the times to make an exception, that this would be the day that it would be okay to put live missiles on jets not at Lola. Especially if the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, whoever has come down and says, hey, we need you guys to fly combat air patrols over the West Coast. Get jets in the air now. You don't have time to get every jet on the Nellis flight line over to Lola. By the way, Lola only has, I think, 14 spots, parking spots. You don't have time to get the jets all the way over to Lola, get live munitions over to Lola from the bomb dump, get all your low crews and your maintenance guys over to Lola, because it's on the other side of the base. Y'all got to drive over there. You have to drive. At the time, you had to drive across an active taxiway to get there. Get everyone there, and then get the jets loaded, and then get them in the air. It just wasn't feasible, okay? Which is why, they were like, hey, we need to get jets in the air now. Go ahead and load them right now. So they worked out some kind of compromise. So when squadrons would come to Nellis for red flag, for instance, a lot of times they wouldn't park on the normal flight line. They would park over in an area that was across from the main parking spots on the flight line. You've probably seen it in DCS. They had like these blast shield barriers there. You could load live weapons over there. In fact, a lot of times if you were doing functional checks on, like for instance, functional checks on an AGM-65, you would do it over there, even if it wasn't a live AGM-65. A lot of actually inert AGM-65s have live rocket motors, but they do not have explosives. They are inert explosives. But that was an area where it was kind of okay, I guess, to load live ordnance. So the compromise was that, okay, we'll move the jets over there and load them up there. But the part of that compromise with that was that we'd have to unload the aircraft here on the parking spots on our side of the flight line, then move the aircraft over there, and then move all the munitions and maintenance guys over there. It was closer than Lola, had more parking spots, but that was the compromise, which didn't make any sense to me. The jets are already loaded, right? So, but that's what they decided to do. So the jets turn around, they get back in their parking spaces. We take all the munitions off of them. We safe the guns up. The jets then taxi all the way back over to that side of the flight line. And we load up our toolboxes on jammers, and we drive them all the way over to the other side of the flight line. And then we get back to loading. We load all the planes up, and they take off. And they stayed in the air for a long time. By the time all of the the red tape and had been cut, and we were able to launch the aircraft. By this time, it was maybe, I know it was past lunchtime. I just remember everyone was starving. Everyone was really hungry, and it was past lunchtime. And we sat over there for, boy, I remember sitting over there. We were there at least 15, 16 hours. Because I remember that night, I was a day shifter, so normally I would have been home before it was dark. But I remember how eerie it was to look out from the flight line to the Las Vegas Strip and see it completely dark. You know, normally on the flight line at night, one of the cool things about Nellis Air Force Base at night is you're working on the flight line and you look over and you see the Strip all lit up. It's great. But I remember that night, sitting over there waiting for the jets to come back and looking over, and it was just completely dark. It was dark. It was quiet. It was just eerie. And this was the time before everyone had a smartphone. So we really didn't get very many updates on what was happening, outside of our little world on the flight line. The last thing that we heard was the Pentagon was bombed and terrorists had flown planes into the World Trade Center. We didn't even know about the fourth flight that had crashed into Pennsylvania. I didn't find that out until I got home. We had cell phones though. These weren't smartphones. And I remember my wife at the time, she was a mid shifter. So she would come home and like sleep throughout the day. So I remember calling to wake her up when I had a break and be like, hey, you got to turn the news on. I know you're sleeping, but you got to turn the news on. And I'm sure they're going to be calling you in here pretty soon. And sure enough, she was a weapons troop as well. So, they called the entire base in. Like everyone had to come in. And it just felt like we were there forever. And in fact, I remember when the planes finally came back some time later. I guess they just stayed in the air and just hit tankers all night. We just recovered them, and then they sent us home, and the night shift and the mid shift guys took over. And it was weird that 2 hour span, 2.5 hour span of loading the aircraft up while they're scrambling. That's got to be like the only time in history that aircraft have had to scramble from a stateside airbase, since Pearl Harbor maybe. But they were in scramble mode. They were like ready to take off and do whatever they had to do. But that 2 hours of loading those jets and then taking the munitions down and then reloading them, that's probably the craziest day on the flight line. And then, then after that, just spending the next 12 plus hours, not knowing what the hell was going on. It was pretty crazy. It's very weird to think back on that day. That's what I think of every September 11th. This is just that day on the flight line. Very sad day that none of us will ever forget. It changed the world forever. It really, really did. So those of you out there that were also on the flight line that day, I'd love to hear your stories, man, because I know, like I said, everyone in the military has got a September 11th story. And I'd love to hear it. So feel free to reach out to me and let me know what you think. So hopefully you guys have a good day of remembrance, and you guys take care of each other. Talk to you later.